You know, we've got some strange events going on with the postponements of all the tournaments right now. But I just recently did an article for Bassmaster, and it was actually kind of a neat article for me because what we talked about was really good lures from the past that had fallen off the radar. And they fall off the radar for different reasons. Sometimes they're manufacturing, sometimes it's just fads like women's clothing. They fall out of fad for some reason. But what I want to talk about is one that has kind of done that. But it was an accident to begin with. In the old days, we fished what we called chuggers. My dad fished a Lucky 13, which was a chugger. And what really made a chugger different was the shape of this lower lip and the mouth on it. And when you threw it out there, you just boop, boop, plop, plop, and then you let it sit there until all the ripples dispersed. And then you plop it again. And it was a chugger, and there were several companies made them. Heddon back then, and made, you know, a Heddon chugger. Then the ones in Texas that we fished a lot on Falcon and Rayburn was called a Pico Pop. But they were all chuggers. Then all of a sudden, a Rebel Lure Company came with a Pop R. And it was designed to be just another chugger. But, and this was purely by accidental design, they made the lower lip on it didn't protrude out as far as the other ones. The molds they made, that lower lip sticks back in. As I showed you in the first one, that lower lip, see how far it comes out. Well, this one here doesn't do that, and it really gave the bait a different quality that nobody knew about until, actually I didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it. Actually, this bait actually ceased to be made by Rebel. In the early 80s, I had a client who brought the world of topwater chuggers into another dimension for me. I'd never seen a chugger fish the way he fished it. He was using the Pop R chugger made by Rebel. And like all chuggers, initially you kind of plopped and you worked them fairly slow. He worked this thing at such a high speed, I couldn't believe it. And I learned as a guy, if the day's tough, hey, don't tell him you think he's crazy or something. Because sure enough, something will about the time you get that out of your mouth, a fish will eat it, and that's what happened. It really, before I could open my mouth, about a 5-pounder sucked this bait in. And the bait was magical to me. The worse the fishing got, the better this lure got. But it was the speed that I'd never, ever seen a chugger work at. And then when I really started trying to duplicate it myself, because this bait, the Pop R had ceased to be even made. Of course, I was traveling across the country fishing tournaments. Every little store I went into, I'd look and I'd see 2 or 3 hanging there in old packaging. I'd buy them. I eventually had more of the Pop Rs than anybody in the whole country. I know. But it was, again, it was that accident. And I actually started fishing it with him, and it's a really kind of unique but difficult technique. And that is your rod action has to be right. Your speed of your tip of the rod has to be right. You can only use certain pound test lines, 17-pound test line. You don't want to use anything below that. You don't want to use a sinking line, because any of those will cause it to become an old chugger where it just goes bloop, bloop, bloop again. And now you've lost the amazing quality of this bait. That, again, this client of mine discovered on his own somehow. And I started fishing it in tournaments, and it worked in the late summer was the best time to work, where everybody called the dog days of summer because it's hot, the fish quit biting, they go deep. And this was an incredible bait that time of year. And I come close to winning some local tournaments in Texas at that time. And then finally, in 1983 at the U.S. Open, I won the U.S. Open on it. And again, I was keeping it a secret because nobody else except that one client of mine knew how to fish this bait. And I probably owned the only ones left on the planet anyway. And there was a couple of friends of mine, actually young guides on the lake, Conroe, where I guided, that I actually told about it. One of them's name was Randy Fight, my brother, and the other one's named Zell Rowland. And I told them I would kill both of them if they ever told anybody how they were fishing this bait. And we did okay for a while, but in 1986, Zell was like all young anglers. He was starving to death, and he won a BASS Mega Bass tournament at Lake Chickamauga in Tennessee on the Pop R, the Rico. It wasn't a Rico then. It was called a Pop R. And he spilled his guts. And I haven't forgiven him since. I love the guy, but I still haven't forgiven him for giving the secret away of what he, but still, the difficulty of fishing it right. And so Rebel brought it back. They destroyed all their moles. They still didn't even underbait themselves, because when they brought it back, they put that big lip back on it that this bait, the original bait they made, did not have. And it was just a function of the mode they made. And Zell, to get it to work right on those new Pop R's, would actually take sandpaper and sand it off again. At that same time, I met a lady who owned Lobina Lures out west in the U.S. Open. And a Japanese fisherman out there named Norio Tanabe said, "I'll make that bait for you, and I'll make it better." And that was the birth of the Rico. The Rico became a perfect bait, because he knew if you see it, it doesn't have a lower lip on it. And he put better hooks on it. And that's another key. You got to have exactly the right size hooks on it. You put a little bit heavier hook on it, it sinks it down, then it's going to turn back into a chugger. And he actually put on a fancy, marabou and deer hair skirt on it. Back in the old Pop R days, this is the old Pop R. It was not near as cosmetically pretty. It had, the hooks weren't as great. It caught the dickens out of fish. It has this marlar tail on it. So this became a much more sophisticated bait. And this is the one I started fishing, and this was the origin of the Rico. So it was really a fascinating bait, but there are some real keys, again, like I've already hinted at, with hook size, the knot you tie on it, the size line, and then the way you work it, that I want to show you. What I'm trying to let you see right here is that I'm tying directly to the bait. I don't have a snap or anything on there, or even a split ring. And that's important. Also, the size of the line, 17-pound test or bigger, nothing under that. That line helps float the bait, which helps you give that unique action. Also, you see that knot's fairly large, and I leave what's called a pretty large tag on it for the same reason. But I'm going to pull that knot all the way down to the bottom of the eye. Now, obviously, when you catch a fish, or occasionally, you got to readjust that. That allows you to give this bait that unique action that only this bait has over all of their chuggers. What I want to demonstrate is, this is one of the original Lucky 13s. It's one of the original, what we used to call chuggers. And I'm going to show you the action. Normally, you popped it, chugged it 2 or 3 times, and then you'd let it sit. My dad sometimes let it sit until every ripple went away. And then he'd chug it a few more times. But if you see, it's hard to distinguish when you first watch, but later you'll pick it up, is that it's a chugging sound more than what I will show you with the Rico. And you can vary the size of the chug, but it's still that chugging sound is what all the original chuggers were designed to do. And then, of course, along came the Pop R, which now I call the Rico. It actually was an error in the way they made the bait that allowed it to do what now is called that very, very fast movement. Just the opposite of the chugger, they tend to work it real fast, just short pauses. And again, the client of mine, he used to hire me. He showed me this technique, and at first, like I said, I thought he was completely out of his mind until a 5-pounder ate it. And then from that point on, I learned that this is one of the most effective techniques there is, especially in warm, hot water. The hotter the water, the better. Everybody's favorite question. What is your favorite colors? Well, function's always more important to me than cosmetics, but here are my 2 favorite colors in the Rico. This is what we call a Cisco. It's really kind of a bone, shiny side and belly with a olive green back. The other one's called Lightning. It's basically just a black back silver with some kind of, red stripes on it. That's my 2 favorites, even though everybody has a different one. If you like the video, subscribe, and we'll probably find you more in the future. So now I'm just got my rod, walking down to the pond, and looky here what's beside it. Yeah, and I think there's another one right here. Looking for Morels reminds me a lot of looking for bass. You look and you look and you cast and you cast. About the time you think you're not going to catch one, boom, there one is.